in this age of uncertainty, anxiety, fear of AI and jobs going away, we need to invest more in the skills that are deeply human, the skills that no AI is ever going to have. That, what is it that we have as humans? It's empathy and compassion and creativity and all the things that are uniquely human. This is where leaders need to focus.
Hi, I'm Blake Schofield, founder and CEO of The Bridge to Fulfillment. Mom to 3, USA Today top 10 professional coach, and former corporate executive who got tired of sacrificing my life for a comfortable paycheck. My mission is to expand perspectives to achieve greater impact at home and work without sacrifice. This is The Bridge to Fulfillment. On today's episode of The Bridge to Fulfillment, I interview Minette Norman. I'm really excited to share her journey and her experience with you. Minette spent over 30 years in the software industry, rising up to become a VP of engineering. And then in 2020, with some leadership changes, transitioned, started her own business consulting. And what she does is really help leaders step into bold leadership. We have some amazing conversations around the skills leaders need today and what skills they need for the future in order to truly thrive. Excited to share her journey, her knowledge and experience, and her perspectives with you today. Minette, I'm so excited to have you today. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me, Blake.
I'm really excited. I feel like this is going to be a great conversation to dive into. But before we kind of dive into the meat of the conversation, I would love it if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about your background and how you ended up in this work and the stuff that you're doing that you're really passionate about.
Sure. Kind of a long career story that I'm going to tell very, very briefly. So I started in tech back in 1989, back in the early days of Silicon Valley. I started as a technical writer. So I got my first job at Adobe when they were developing Photoshop 1.0, and I wrote the Photoshop 1.0 tutorial. And that was my entree into Silicon Valley. And then I spent the next 30 years at various software companies and started as technical writer, individual contributor, got into management positions kind of reluctantly, but then realized, oh my God, this is the most important work I could be doing, is leading teams of people. And I realized what an important job that is. So I ended up in leadership roles for 20 of those 30 years. And my last role, I was VP of engineering at a big software company, Autodesk, had a massive charter, a really big role, loved the job. And then there was a leadership change, and I was no longer really able to do my best work, and my voice wasn't welcome that much. And I decided it's time for me, after 30 years in tech, to do something else. And it was very clear to me I wasn't ready to retire, but it was also clear to me I didn't want to go work for somebody else. And so in 2020, I started my own business, and I focus on inclusive leadership and psychological safety and creating innovative, high-performing teams. I work as a speaker, as a leadership consultant. I do workshops. And I've since written 2 books, one that I wrote myself, The Boldly Inclusive Leader, and one that I co-wrote, The Psychological Safety Playbook with Caroline Helbig. And that brings us to where we are today.
I love it. Thank you for that. What an amazing journey and experience. I always love hearing people's personal career journeys. I think we often think that we're headed one way, and the path always ebbs and flows as we go, exactly as it's meant to be. So what a fascinating story. And, I think there's so many of us. I was just having a conversation recently about how the ripple effects of COVID in 2020 are still happening in so many ways across our society, as it really changed how we worked, how we looked at work, how we looked at maybe the blend of who people are inside the corporation and who they are outside. I grew up in a home with parents who were very traditional in the way they did things, they worked in corporate retail. I ended up spending 18 years in corporate retail. And when I was young, there was this whole understanding of almost you show up at work and this is who you are, and then you're a different person outside of work. And I think that dynamic has shifted a lot. And I think it's something we're all still navigating. And as we now are sitting in a world where any of us that can see the writing on the wall are looking what's happening with AI and technology and where the world is going and starting to say we're in another precipice of significant change of what's coming and how we work together and what work looks like in the future. And so I'm excited to talk to you about leadership and how all of that comes into play, because I think it's more important now than ever.
Oh, I would agree with you. And I think just reflecting on what you just said, that whole separation of who we are at work versus who we are at home, I have always felt uncomfortable with that, right? Because it's like this putting on the mask when you go to work. And I think obviously during COVID, when everyone was in this state of, I'm trying to work from home, and maybe I have aging parents, maybe I have young kids, whatever it is, I live in a tiny apartment, all the things people were dealing with. Suddenly, their work colleagues were getting a glimpse into their real life that they maybe had never chosen to reveal, right? And so that kind of like pulled back the curtain. And I think in many ways that's good, because we shouldn't have to hide when we go to work. We shouldn't have to put on a mask.
I completely agree. One of the big things that, I learned in my own journey as I was a top performer in every company that I worked in. I worked in 5 different retailers with 5 very different cultures and personalities and experiences in that 18 years. And I went through a lot of cycles of being fulfilled and unfulfilled, of going through cycles of burnout. And often having to put on that mask is a huge cognitive burden and stress that actually is creating some of the problems of anxiety and stress and people feeling less engaged at work because they can't feel fully present or fully safe. And so I agree with you. I think COVID opened a door to some of those things, to be able to see the reality of where work fits in with personal life and how do you deal with that when everything is in flux.
Yeah.
I read something recently that talked about the level of anxiety as a society today is equal to what it was at the beginning of COVID.
Oh, I am not surprised, because I feel that deeply myself. Although it is shocking to think about, like we were dealing with a death-threatening pandemic where millions were dying. And yet to think that now, 5 years later, it really is 5 years later, the anxiety is just as high, if not higher, because of everything that's going on around us.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned one of the big drivers for you in changing your career was a leadership change.
Yeah.
It's interesting, having now worked with hundreds of leaders in the last 8 years who, came to me through those cycles of burnout or lack of fulfillment, to hear how common that is as one of the things that drives change for people. And yet we know it's part of being a part of a company culture is there will be leadership change. And to your point, probably the most critical thing is to help equip our leaders to be successful, our leaders to manage stress, our leaders to engage and know their team. I'm interested in your perspective, knowing where we sit as a society today and the opportunities ahead of us in terms of transformation coming with technology and different ways of working. We have companies now trying to bring people back full-time to work. We still have some companies doing hybrid. What do you think are the biggest challenges for leaders today and the skill sets they need to develop to be successful now and in the future?
Well, challenges, there's such a long list of challenges. And I think, I don't want to go deep into the AI thing, but of course, this fear of like what jobs are going away, who will be replaced, right? And so I think all leaders are navigating that. I think here we are, I'm assuming you're in the US also, right? Yeah. In the US, we're navigating this new political climate. So without getting partisan in any way, because I won't do that here, but what I will say is everyone is navigating a new reality where there are words we're not allowed to use, right? I mean, there are things that have changed so drastically. And so leaders within companies are navigating this day to day. Their workforce is concerned. They are concerned about like, what are we allowed to publicly put on our websites? Those types of things are real. And I've been dealing with that with my clients. Let's just look at some of the work that I do around inclusive leadership. So one organization that I worked with is a federal agency. And because they're a federal agency, they cannot use any of the words publicly that were on this long list that came from the Trump administration. That included the word inclusion and inclusivity, diversity, equity, all of these things. So they still believe that we must create workplaces. And I'm going to come back to your question about how to engage teams. They still believe that we have to create workplaces where everyone can do their best work, and we have to change our vocabulary. So think of this as the pressure on the leader of knowing they have to take care of their employees, knowing that employees' experience is based on their direct manager and how their direct manager behaves. So that's a huge amount of pressure on every level of leadership, from C-suite to first line manager. And then the employees are, first of all, they're concerned about their well-being, they're concerned about their jobs going away, and they also expect to be treated with respect. They expect to be treated in a way where they feel appreciated and valued. I mean, every human being needs that. And leaders have to, I would say, in this age of uncertainty, anxiety, fear of AI and jobs going away, we need to invest more in the skills that are deeply human, the skills that no AI is ever going to have. That, what is it that we have as humans? It's empathy and compassion and creativity and all the things that are uniquely human. This is where leaders need to focus.
I could not agree with you more. And the work that, I did as a leader in corporate America, and the work I've done, as an entrepreneur with leaders, what I continue to see is it's the soft skills. It's being able to truly see and understand yourself and other people.
Yeah.
It's knowing how to navigate uncertainty and change and bringing people alongside with you. Those are the skills that really matter, because technology is just a tool, just like everything else. And if we think that tool will solve everything, we're sadly mistaken, right? It's just one way to be able to find a newer, more efficient way to work, but it's only newer, more efficient if people feel safe to use it. If people have time and mental bandwidth to pursue new learning and to pursue developing, gaining additional skills. And so navigating that fine line between uncertainty and stress and change alongside the space to learn how to navigate something that maybe you don't feel good about, or you're not sure how that's going to evolve, and you're not sure how that's going to impact your job or your team in the future, I think is a unique challenge we all face today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I think one of the things, you said soft skills, which is really true, although I don't like the term because it denigrates them. I think these are the most, these are the superpowers of being human. So call them what you will, superhuman skills. I do think that we must invest in these. And we also, leaders traditionally, one of the problems is that, and I experienced this firsthand, is you often get promoted to be a manager and then grow in leadership roles because you're good at the thing that you did before as an individual contributor. So, for example, I was a good technical writer, and my first management job, my manager was like, I need someone to lead the other technical writers. You're a manager now, with almost no training, right? And so yet we also know from research and data that the manager role is the most important role in forming someone's experience at work. And yet we're thrown into this we're really ill-equipped. And so I think one of the things where managers, well, I would say like senior leaders need to invest in managers at all levels today, and to upskill managers. And probably they're mostly focusing on digital tools and AI, whereas where we really need to invest is on these human skills. How do you listen? How do you communicate? How do you get to know every person on your team? How do you create that environment where everyone's voice is welcome and where you can have debate and you can bring out all the ideas and learn together and innovate? And this is the work that I do because I think it is so often neglected in corporate world.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree with you more. I think about my own personal experience being promoted as a, high achieving individual performer to managing a team, and honestly, how overwhelming that felt.
Yeah.
And I think so many new managers feel that way when you feel like, to some degree, maybe I'm a fraud. Like maybe I'm not as good as they think that I am, and I don't actually know what the heck I'm doing, but I'm now in charge and the leader, so I think I should know what I'm doing. And it actually wasn't until I moved to Target Corporation, after I'd been managing people for a number of years, that I actually was given skills and tools to learn how to be an effective manager. And I think that over and over and over again, I see that those skills as a leader are the things that make or break us. Organizations that promote people based on results only tend to create environments where they lose a lot of top talent because that top talent doesn't feel developed or motivated in the ways that they need to be as creative and as innovative and results oriented as possible. And when you talk about, I think back to my experience quite some time ago as a first time leader, the skill sets that were needed for leadership are maybe 50% of what they're needed today. When I look at where we're headed as a society and some of the roles and things that we talk about how tech is going to take over things, tech's going to take over a lot of basic, fundamental, repetitive things that need to get done. Tech is also enabling us to find faster solutions and research and do things in more creative ways. But tech is only as good as the person using it. As a result, I think we're going to end up with a workforce where some people really love and are driven to learn those skills, and other people are learning them because they feel like they have to. And there's this lumpy skill set, right, amongst our teams, and very different ways of learning and working. And one of the things I'm really passionate about is helping people understand that they actually have a unique fingerprint for success, that we actually all work uniquely different. And when you understand and can honor how you're naturally wired for success, you are 2 to 3 times more productive. And also, if you understand that about yourself, you can enable your team to work how they're naturally wired, and they will be 2 to 3 times more productive. But it's a different mindset than this mindset of how we had of like, this is how things should be done.
Yes, yes. One size fits all. Yeah.
One size fits all. You just need to follow the steps and get here. I think we're really moving into a place where the true leaders and true companies that will really be empowered to create growth and become market leaders are the ones that actually begin to understand these nuances about people working differently, creativity, creating cultures where people are innovating and comfortable with the unknown. What are your thoughts about that? And what advice would you give from your lens about helping leaders move into that space?
I think it's so important to recognize what you've said about, how it is a strength for us all to work differently. And I think what we see I saw this so much in the tech world, but it's in all worlds. You see people tempted to hire people just like them because they feel the most comfortable with them, right? And we hire in our image. You've heard that a lot, and it happens so much. And what you get is people who think alike, have the same background, same socioeconomic background or education or whatever it is. And what you really need, especially today, where we need innovation, we need different ways of seeing things. You need people who do not think alike, which means you need talent that comes from all different walks of life, different educational backgrounds, different cultures. And then you bring them together, and you have to create an environment as the leader of this group where you are not seeking conformity and you're not seeking everyone to exactly speak the same way, act the same way, work the same way, but instead to say, what are the differences? Okay, let us leverage those and tap into those differences. Let's celebrate them. Let's appreciate them. And let's not force people to do things that don't work for them. Let's instead tap into our strengths and complement our weaknesses with people who have those skills. And so I think that's a really human leadership skill, because it takes, first of all, having the sense to challenge our own biases and becoming aware of them, bring together a team of people who are not all alike. And then the tricky part is that can be uncomfortable. Like if we all really are different people who think and act differently, how do we work together? That takes time. That takes investment. Okay, let's get to know each other and let's figure out how we are going to navigate this complicated world of work together in a way that we're going to be stronger and that, the sum is truly greater than the parts. That's what we want.
Mm-hmm. One of the biggest, I think, learnings that I had for myself that I've been able to help so many leaders work on is understanding what their biases are, but what their emotional triggers are.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And how are those playing into how you're showing up at work or how you're viewing your work circumstance? I believe we're entering an era where empowering our leaders to really truly understand themselves, what motivates themselves, and learn how to develop themselves, understand how to find those career pathing opportunities, how to find those projects, how to truly be empowered to create positive movement in a company matter more now than ever. Where everything used to be very tops down, we're entering an era where I read a study just the other day talking about that the percentage of disengaged employees continues to increase. Right? And I think often that happens because those employees don't have some of these human skills, right? These aren't things that we were teaching 20 or 30 years ago, and maybe don't feel empowered to create that change inside the organization. But when we as leaders can understand and appreciate diversity, when we can challenge our own biases, when we understand our own emotional triggers, when we can then understand other people better, we can create that environment that is very, very powerful, where people work together from a place of flow, ease, and a place of creativity.
Yeah, I'm curious about the study. If you remember, did it pinpoint the reasons why people were less engaged?
Yes, one of the top ones was really all around lack of clarity on what people are doing.
Huh.
And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, right? I worked inside a lot of large retail organizations. And when you have huge macroeconomic shifts, I mean, when you talk about what's happening with the tariffs and how much work and energy and effort organizations, especially if you're a product-based organization, you're having to work through. What are the cost implications of this? For how long? What do we do with supply chain? Do we need to produce things in different places we've never produced them before?
Yeah.
How much risk should we take in this product versus not? And then how does this impact all of our employees all the way down to the bottom line, right? And you're leveraging all of that alongside how are we using technology and AI, and how are we upskilling our employees? You know, the data right now is saying that CEOs are saying 40 to 50% of employees will need to reskill.
Yeah.
That the gap is that big, right? And so you have employees feeling the need to reskill, but don't really know what to reskill on, or probably not given enough direction on what to reskill, because some of the top leaders don't even know. They just want to move. And then we have all these other things happening from a macroeconomic standpoint that are shifting the foundation of maybe how the business has historically been done, with question marks on how long it's going to be sitting like this before things actually move. And so my experience has been, when you have leaders with that many changes and competing priorities and that much uncertainty, that very much ripples down to employees not really being clear on how can I be successful and what do I need to do to continue to be successful long term. And I would say, you know, despite being a leader inside large organizations for, 18 years, it wasn't really until I became an entrepreneur that I truly understood how to navigate uncertainty, that I had a map, and I understood how to emotionally deal with uncertainty, how to have mental frameworks to deal with uncertainty, and how to have a process, a step-by-step process that enabled me to take small changes in uncertainty to reduce risk and ensure I was going in the right direction. And I think these are skills that, to be honest, we haven't had inside corporate that are more important than ever.
Yeah, although I do think that certainly change and uncertainty has always been there. I mean, I think it's accelerated for sure. But one of the things that I saw a lot, and it goes back to your statement about, people wanting clarity, is that what a trap that leaders can fall into is when there is uncertainty and maybe a decision hasn't been made about which way we're going to go, they go silent because they're afraid of miscommunicating, or saying something and having to reverse what they said. And what everyone is craving is to know what's going on, even if it's not permanent, right? And so I think one of the jobs of today's leaders is to communicate relentlessly, like just be always communicating, because things are changing so rapidly, but do not leave your employees in the dark about that. And what I remember when I was leading teams, and at some point I had a really large time, I had like over 1,000 people who were directly on my org chart. And I was I would say like a super communicator, because I felt like anything that is not confidential, my employees deserve and need to know. I should not be hoarding information. And so I would communicate in different ways. I would hold all hands meetings. I would send out newsletters, and I would make myself available, because I felt like people need to understand why we're doing the things we're doing, so they can stay engaged, so they can tie their work to something bigger than the task at hand. And I think this is what motivates and engages people, as opposed to, I don't really know what upper management is doing right now, so I guess I'll just check out for now, right? Until I hear more. So
I will overwork in the hope that, right? In the hope that my
someone
job
will recognize that, right? Yeah.
Yes. And I think what you shared is really, really valuable. The importance of more communication when we don't know what's coming. And that often requires a skill as a leader to gain comfort that as a leader, your job isn't to know everything.
Not to have all the answers. You do. You have to be willing to get up and say, I don't know. I will know, I will find out, and I will get back to you, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But that takes, first of all, it's an act of vulnerability as a leader to get up and say, I don't have the answer. And I believe it's the leaders that will have most followers and will be most respected and valued. It's like, oh, that person is real. I can trust them. they're telling me the truth, right? As opposed to making up some nonsense when you don't have an answer, or just staying silent and not communicating. I think the other thing we underestimate is how many times we have to communicate the same thing. And I learned this, especially in communicating with large or globally dispersed teams, is you think you've been crystal clear about something, and then you later go back into that same group and you say, so, we're working on this. And you see the blank faces of some people never absorbed what you said to them. So you have to communicate in different ways, in writing, in speaking, in whatever, video, whatever it is, you have got to communicate multiple times before it sinks in. And you've heard these numbers like you have to say something 7 times before, whatever it is. Once is usually not enough.
100%. And it also goes to that old adage, I think, that when you begin to understand the nuances of humans and how they think and what they're experiencing. And again, when you're in work, this is a part of your life, but you have all these things coming from your personal life in with you to work.
Yeah.
Right? We don't just check that stuff off in the box. So on your team, you might have someone whose mother was diagnosed with cancer. You might have somebody else who's struggling to take care of a special needs child.
Yeah.
You might also have another employee who's like completely 100% passionate, excited, and engaged. And all of that's happening at one time.
That's right.
And each one of those people, based on whatever life stressors they're going to have, are going to hear the message differently. And each one of those people will also hear the messages differently based on their way of perceiving and understanding the world. And this idea of we just share the message and the message goes down and people know what to execute isn't really reality, but creating that dynamic discussion point, that's really where I have seen things work in powerful ways. And to your point, I think there's even more opportunity for us to work that way in the future. One of the benefits of AI is productivity. Like you could do something in less than 5 minutes in AI that would have taken weeks. So what do you do instead with the time?
Right.
Do you use that time to actually build a team that's more cohesive, that can be more creative and more innovative and start solving problems you could never solve before?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is where I think that, like, the role of leadership, kind of coming back to your early question about the role of leadership today, we often think about leadership like kind of capital L, with like you think of the C-suite or the executives, but leadership goes all the way down. And I think this is where, especially in our world today, that first line or middle manager is caught in the middle between employees and senior leaders, and their roles, I think, are evolving in important ways and should evolve. So not like just telling people what to do or checking on status reports, but really being creative change makers within the organization and reinventing how we do work. And I think it could be a very empowering role to middle managers in a way that it hasn't been before. But that's even going to take reskilling, because as we were talking about, you were good at what you did, you got promoted. I was good at what I did, I got promoted. But I wasn't skilled in being a change maker or being, an innovation leader or whatever it is. Those are different skills. So to invest in your middle managers and like, how can they help their employees thrive in this age of uncertainty, no matter what's coming down from on high, right?
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. Like I said, for me, Target was the first organization I worked in that really developed its people in that way. It's a huge part of why I chose to move cross country and go work for them, was the opportunity to develop in that way. And I think there's no more perfect example than one of the experiences I had there. When I went to work at Target, it had been a company that hired people from college, and those people stayed for 30 some odd years.
Yeah.
And I was one of a batch of people that had come experienced inside the organization. And as a result of the company culture, people just sort of felt like, I'm here forever. This is family. This is home. And then there was a huge 1,200 person layoff that happened all in one day. Like chain of people walked outside like a parade. And I can't express like the feeling of dread that happened that day as you started seeing people's calendars get booked with appointments. And now you're calling all your friends to see if they have a calendar appointment because those are the people that won't make it. And I remember those days and weeks afterward as a leader of a team trying to navigate, what do you do in a circumstance like this where people's sort of foundation emotionally has been blown up and there's so much uncertainty. And thankfully, I got inspired, found that old book, Who Moved My Cheese? And I sat down with my team and I just opened up the dialogue about, listen, I know this is scary.
Yeah.
And I don't have all the answers, but let's talk about how do you navigate change.
Yeah.
And let's talk about how you're feeling and how can we support one another. And it was something for me that instinctively I just knew needed to happen to take care of my team. And I'm gracious that I had an amazing team who stepped into that vulnerability with me. And we figured out how to navigate what felt very scary together. But I saw many other leaders not have that skill set or not know how to navigate it and had very different experiences with their team. Substantially more stress because they didn't know how their team was feeling. They knew that discomfort was there. They didn't know how to address it. And like I said, if I look at where we are today, you're right. Uncertainty has always been an issue. Change has always been an issue and always will be. But I think we're at a place where the change is happening much faster.
Exactly.
And much more rapidly. And we have less history to go off of to know what it's going to look like in the future. And so these human skills or soft skills, leadership skills, to me are the most critical thing that we can do to create the best workforce and the best experience and continue to move forward in a way where we're driving positive change for everyone.
Yeah, I want to pick up on what you did actually with the layoffs and the who moved my cheese and just, as you said, opening up the dialogue and letting people express what they were feeling. That is such a critical leadership skill that so many leaders shy away from because emotions are terrifying and most people think that they don't belong at work. And that's something that I am trying to get people to understand is that we do not leave our emotions at home when we go to work. They are what make us human. And in fact, without emotions, we can't function. We can't make decisions. But to not acknowledge them does us such a disservice. And I think, to be more skillful in being able to talk about emotion and not just react to emotion, but notice what we're experiencing, like notice I'm getting triggered, but choosing a response that is something I'll be proud of as opposed to something I'm going to regret. All of those things make us better leaders. And yet I have honestly, like examples I've seen after a layoff, two extremes is like one leader who literally had called us all together after a massive layoff and said, I'm so excited about the future and the best days are ahead. And, no acknowledgement of what had just happened, no acknowledgement that we had lost dear, dear colleagues and that we were grieving in many ways. We were shocked, we were fearful, we were sad. But instead, he skipped that step, the step that you did of like, can we talk about where we are and how we move forward? And he moved straight to, I'm so excited about our future. And what he got was a room full of cynics and angry people who were like, what the hell? Like, do you have no clue what we're feeling right now? And not even acknowledging that, right? And then the other extreme is like a leader who gets up. I think this was one that was on LinkedIn several years ago, and he was actually filming himself crying, like, I just had the hardest day of my life. I let go 1,000 people. Like, that's not what we want to see either, right? So somewhere in the middle is like, I am a leader who is human and who cares, and I am not afraid to talk about the hard stuff. And let's do that so that we can collectively move forward in a more positive way, but not expect to snap your fingers and we have a rosy future, right?
Mm-hmm. This has been one of the, I think, biggest areas where I've seen my clients grow, what you're talking about here. Because like I said, most of us weren't taught how to deal with these things.
Mm-hmm.
And historically, we've wanted to separate personal from business, but the reality is we don't. Every one of those fears, doubts, and anxieties that your employees are having, they bring with them to work. Yeah. And then when, to your point, when these things happen, they feel unsafe. Yeah. And there's been so much data that shows what happens when people disassociate or go into fight or flight. You're literally not capable of even connecting to the creative and logical problem-solving part of their brain.
No, and they're in survival mode, right? Total survival mode, yeah.
And so how, if you have a staff of employees that are in survival mode, do you believe that you can actually generate the types of results you want to generate? You cannot. And it's a fascinating thing as somebody who, lived through environments where they were very fear-based. And I can see how I was operating out of fear. I was performing as a top performer, but that performance was coming from fear, doubt, and anxiety and worry, rather than coming from inspiration and, feeling safe and creative. And I think the challenge is that historically we've had environments that rewarded or often encouraged those high achievers to continue to achieve at all cost until those people completely burned out and then no longer could work or left our organizations.
Yeah.
And then we're losing the best people because we aren't creating an environment where we're actually allowing them to be human. We're allowing them to feel safe enough to maybe have a little bit of ebb and flow in their work when they might need to slow down for a day or two to catch their breath or regulate their nervous system or process through whatever changes might be happening so that they can then show up and do their best work.
Yeah.
And I feel like the leaders of today who thrive and the ones for sure of the future are going to be the ones that understand that.
Oh, I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you. And it's, that fight, flight, freeze, and that just living in fear, that has honestly been so much of many people's work experience forever. And think what is possible. And I've seen it because I have been part of those rare teams where you do have psychological safety and you do not come from a place of fear, but you come from a place of creation and possibilities. And like what happens is magic. It feels like magic because every single member of those teams is fully in. They're sharing their ideas. We're debating them in a respectful and fun way. And we come up with the absolutely best ideas we could collectively. Those teams that I've been a part of have given me hope for my whole career that this is possible. But I think so many of us, like you, like me, have been in those fear-based cultures where we are like just on the brink of burning out all the time because we're just at such high, what's the word, vigilance. We're in a hyper-vigilance, mindset every single day.
Yeah. And you don't have to be. I mean, this is the work that I've been really blessed to do individually with leaders for the last 8 years. And I'm excited to be able to take back inside companies and do with teams that literally one leader who has this skill set can change the dynamic of their entire team.
Oh, totally.
Watched it happen, client after client after client who, a month into doing this work is able to show up as a completely different person in work. And because of how they show up, that ripple effect for their team is massive. And I can't think of, honestly, anything more important in the world we're going into than to help leaders have those skill sets.
I agree with you. And I love that you're using, it's funny, we didn't connect on this, that you're using the term ripple effect. I just did a talk, which I called the ripple effect, because I truly think that leaders have this either unconscious or conscious ripple effect. And why not be conscious about the ripple we are having in our organizations and our teams? Be deliberate in how we want that energy to go out and what culture are we creating?
Mm-hmm. In order for leaders to do that, those leaders have to have the space and the time and the control over what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. And to me, that's the place that I know as a leader, I really struggled with when I was in corporate. Those were not skills that I had developed. I didn't understand how my brain fundamentally worked. I didn't know how to create that sense of control. And I think in large organizations, we struggle to be able to give our leaders and our employees those skills. And we leave our leaders and employees to figure it out on their own. And that, just to be honest, doesn't really happen. So I'm excited about where things are going. I love the work that you're doing because at the end of the day, it's helping people develop these skills for themselves, that there's such beauty in the impact that is possible. And when I look at where the world is going, I used to be someone that was very afraid of change. My belief system was, right, change is hard, painful, difficult. And I think that's true of a lot of people. And through my own journey, I came to understand that the uncertainty was actually a possibility. Uncertainty was actually, how can I create more of what I want? And I think as a society, we're sitting on the precipice of that. How can we actually create more of what we want? How can we use technology, our creative abilities, the capabilities we have today, we've never had, to create better environments, to create better health, to create better connection and community, to create companies that make a bigger, more positive impact?
Yeah. It is all possible. And I think, to your point that leaders have been on their own to develop these skills. And this is why you and I think, are doing the work that we're doing. We want to help. My commitment after leaving the tech world is I want to help leaders do better, because so many of these lessons about like self-regulation and self-awareness and how I showed up as a leader, I learned very late in my leadership journey. Like I was, I had a 20 years of leading teams, and I would say it was my 15th year, I started to like get some of these skills. I mean, some of them I had. That's not to say I didn't have any of them, but where I really tuned into learning more about the human brain and how we interact was really around the 15-year mark of leadership, and spent those last 5 years trying to develop all of these skills. And I think, why not, when we are a first-time manager leading a small team, why don't we invest in that, in those people then, so that they don't have to figure it out for 15 years on their own?
And so that the teams they're developing grow to be greater leaders and
Exactly.
better contributors from the get-go.
Yeah, because what your job is to, as a leader, is to create the leaders who are going to follow you and be the next level of leaders and the next generation of leaders. So how are you going to do that if you don't have the skills yourself?
100%. Minette, it has been such a pleasure connecting with you. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, your perspective with us today.
Oh, what a pleasure. I feel like we could have talked for hours and hours and hours and never run out of material.
I agree. It's a beautiful thing when you have two people passionate about the same topic. And, I always say success leaves clues. The true key things that matter always show up. Maybe we talk about them in different words or have different approaches, but it's the same fundamental principles.
Definitely.
So with that said, I would love to leave it with you. Is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have? Or anything that's on your heart that you'd like to close us out with today?
There's nothing in particular. I guess what I would say is that in these challenging times that we're all living in, I would just say that one of the things that we can all do to get out of the fear and to get out of the anxiety is to get a little bit more curious about the next thing. What can I learn about this person who's challenging me? Or what can I learn about this new strategy that I know nothing about? And to try to just let curiosity replace fear, whether it's with people or technology or change. And curiosity leads us in so many good directions. So I would just say, stay curious. And yeah, that's my main takeaway. And there's nothing that you really missed asking me except where to find me if people want to follow up.
Great. Where can we find you if we want to follow up?
So my website is a good place to start, MinetteNorman.com. That's MINETTENORMAN. And I'm also on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect with people and just start the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Minette. Appreciate you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
You too, Blake. Thank you.